I remember the exact moment my life changed forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Chicago, and I was running late for my job interview at the marketing firm. The traffic light had just turned red at the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Oak Street when I heard the screech of tires behind me. Before I could even look in my rearview mirror, I felt the jarring impact as another car slammed into the back of my little Honda Civic. My heart was pounding as I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and trying to process what had just happened. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I could feel my hands starting to shake. I took a deep breath, turned off the engine, and stepped out of my car to assess the damage. The first thing I noticed was that my rear bumper was completely crumpled, and there was a spiderweb crack running across my back windshield. But what caught my attention next was the man emerging from the silver BMW behind me. He was tall, probably around 6 feet, with sandy brown hair that was slightly disheveled. He wore a navy blue suit that looked expensive, and his face was etched with concern and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," he said, rushing toward me with his hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. "Are you hurt? Please tell me you're okay." I looked at him, this stranger who had just rear-ended my car, and I found myself oddly calm despite the circumstances. There was something about his voice, the way he seemed genuinely worried about my well-being rather than defensive about the accident, that caught me off guard. "I think I'm okay," I replied, doing a quick mental inventory of my body. "Just a little shaken up. What about you?" "I'm fine, physically anyway," he said, running his hand through his hair. "But I feel terrible. I was distracted by a phone call from work, and I didn't see that you had stopped. This is entirely my fault." I was surprised by his honesty. In my experience, most people in car accidents immediately went on the defensive, looking for ways to shift blame. But this man, whose name I didn't even know yet, was taking complete responsibility. "Well, accidents happen," I said, though I was mentally calculating how much this was going to cost me and whether I'd make it to my interview on time. "We should probably call the police and exchange insurance information." "Of course, absolutely," he agreed, already pulling out his phone. "I'm Michael, by the way." "Michael Thompson." "Sarah," I replied. "Sarah Mitchell." As we waited for the police to arrive, we stood there making small talk about the weather and the traffic in Chicago. I learned that he worked as an architect for a firm downtown and was on his way back from a client meeting when the accident happened. He seemed genuinely nice, and I found myself actually enjoying our conversation despite the circumstances. When the police officer arrived, he took our statements and wrote up the report. Michael was completely straightforward about being at fault, which I appreciated. He gave me his insurance information and his business card, insisting that I call him if there were any problems with the claim, or if I needed anything at all. "I know this probably sounds strange," he said as the tow truck was hooking up my car, "but would you let me give you a ride wherever you were going? It's the least I can do." I hesitated for a moment. Getting into a car with a stranger wasn't exactly the smartest thing to do, but there was something about Michael that made me feel safe. Maybe it was the way he had handled the entire situation with such grace and accountability. "I was actually on my way to a job interview," I admitted, "but I'm definitely going to be late now. Where is it? I'll get you there as fast as I can," he offered. I told him the address, and he insisted on driving me there in his BMW. During the 15-minute drive, we talked more about our lives. I learned that he was originally from a small town in Wisconsin, had moved to Chicago for college, and had been working as an architect for about 5 years. He was passionate about sustainable design and had dreams of starting his own firm someday. I found myself opening up to him in a way that surprised me. I told him about my recent graduation from Northwestern with a degree in marketing, my struggles to find a job in my field, and my dreams of working for a company that made a positive impact on the world. "You know," he said as we pulled up to the office building where my interview was scheduled, "my firm is actually looking for someone to help with marketing and client relations. It's not a huge company, but the work is meaningful, and the people are great. Would you be interested in hearing more about it?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously offering me a job opportunity after rear-ending my car?" He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm serious. You seem smart and passionate, and honestly, the universe has a funny way of bringing people together sometimes. I made it to my interview. Though I was 20 minutes late, the interviewer was understanding about the accident, but I could tell that my tardiness had made a negative impression. The interview didn't go well, and I left feeling discouraged and frustrated. But as I was waiting for my friend to pick me up, my phone rang. It was Michael. "How did the interview go?" he asked. "Not great," I admitted. "Being late didn't help, and I just don't think it was the right fit." "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. "But the offer I mentioned earlier still stands. Would you be interested in meeting with my boss tomorrow? I know it's unconventional, but I think you'd be a great fit for what we're looking for." I thought about it for a moment. What did I have to lose? "Okay," I said. "I'll meet with him." The next day, I found myself sitting in the offices of Thompson & Associates Architecture, which I learned was actually Michael's family firm, started by his father 30 years earlier. The office was beautiful, with exposed brick walls, large windows, and architectural models displayed throughout the space. Michael's father, Robert Thompson, was a kind man in his early 60s who had the same warm smile as his son. He interviewed me for about an hour, asking about my background, my interests, and my goals. By the end of our conversation, he offered me a position as the firm's marketing coordinator. "I have to ask," I said as we shook hands, "are you hiring me because your son feels guilty about the accident?" Robert laughed. "Michael did tell me about yesterday's incident, and yes, he was quite concerned about how it affected your day. But I'm offering you this job because you're qualified, and because I think you'll be an asset to our team. Michael's recommendation certainly didn't hurt, but I wouldn't hire someone just because my son felt bad about a fender bender." I started working at Thompson & Associates the following Monday, and I quickly fell in love with the job. The firm specialized in sustainable residential and commercial design, and I was responsible for managing their website, social media presence, and client communications. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work I had been hoping to find. Working closely with Michael was interesting. He was professional and respectful, but I could sense that there was something more beneath the surface. He would often bring me coffee in the morning, and we'd end up having long conversations about architecture, sustainability, and life in general. He was incredibly intelligent and passionate about his work, but he also had a great sense of humor and never took himself too seriously. About a month after I started working there, Michael asked me if I'd like to grab dinner after work. "Is this a date?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Would you want it to be?" He replied with a grin. I realized that I absolutely did want it to be a date. Over the past month, I had found myself looking forward to our conversations and feeling disappointed on the days when he was out at client meetings. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, and I was curious to see where it might lead. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, and I found myself completely captivated by his stories about traveling through Europe after college, his love of hiking and photography, and his close relationship with his family. "I have to be honest with you," he said as we shared a piece of tiramisu for dessert. I've been attracted to you since the moment I saw you step out of your car that day. Even covered in stress and probably cursing me in your head. You were beautiful. I felt my cheeks flush. I wasn't cursing you in my head, I protested. I was actually impressed by how you handled the situation. Really? He asked, looking genuinely surprised. Really? Most people would have tried to blame it on anything but themselves. But you took responsibility immediately and made sure I was okay before you even thought about the cars. That says a lot about your character. From that night on, Michael and I were inseparable. We spent our weekends exploring Chicago, trying new restaurants, visiting museums, and taking long walks along the lakefront. He introduced me to his love of architecture by taking me on tours of the city's most famous buildings, explaining the design principles and historical significance of each one. I introduced him to my passion for cooking, and we started a tradition of cooking elaborate meals together on Sunday afternoons. He was terrible at chopping vegetables, but excellent at making me laugh, and our kitchen adventures always ended with more flour on us than in whatever we were trying to bake. 6 months after our first date, Michael took me to the top of the Willis Tower at sunset. Chicago stretched out below us in all directions, the city lights just beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. "Sarah," he said, taking my hands in his, "I know this might sound crazy, but I think I'm falling in love with you." My heart skipped a beat. "Michael," I replied, "I don't think you're falling in love with me. I think you already have. And I think I've fallen in love with you too." He kissed me then, with the entire city spread out below us, and I knew that this was the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. We got engaged a year later, on the anniversary of the accident that brought us together. Michael had planned an elaborate surprise, taking me back to the exact intersection where we first met. When the light turned red, he got out of the car, walked around to my side, and got down on one knee right there in the middle of Michigan Avenue. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, pulling out a ring box. "Will you marry me at the place where our love story began?" I was crying and laughing at the same time as I said yes, and the other drivers stuck at the red light were honking and cheering for us. It was perfect and ridiculous and romantic all at once. We were married the following spring in a beautiful ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Michael's family and my family got along wonderfully, and his father, Robert, walked me down the aisle alongside my own father, who had flown in from California for the wedding. In my wedding speech, I told our guests about how we met and how sometimes the most unexpected moments can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. If someone had told me that getting rear-ended in traffic would lead me to the love of my life, I would have thought they were crazy, I said, looking at Michael with tears in my eyes. But here we are, proof that fate works in mysterious ways. Our honeymoon was a 3-week trip to Italy, where Michael showed me all the architectural marvels he had studied in school. We walked through the ruins of Rome, marveled at the Duomo in Florence, and got lost in the winding canals of Venice. But my favorite moment was when we were sitting at a small cafe in Tuscany, watching the sunset over the rolling hills, and Michael said, "I can't wait to build a life with you, Sarah. A real life, with a house and kids and all the beautiful chaos that comes with it." We bought our first house 2 years after we got married, a 1920s bungalow in Oak Park that needed a lot of work but had incredible character. Michael drew up plans to renovate it, and we spent months working on it together, learning how to tile bathrooms and refinish hardwood floors. It was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but I loved every minute of it because we were creating something together. Our first child, Emma, was born 3 years after we got married. I'll never forget the moment Michael held her for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he looked at this tiny person we had created together. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." Being parents was harder than either of us had expected, but it was also more rewarding than we could have imagined. Emma was a curious, energetic child who kept us on our toes. She loved to help Michael with his architectural drawings, which usually meant scribbling on them with crayons, and she had inherited his love of building things, constantly constructing elaborate structures with blocks and cardboard boxes. Our second child, James, was born 2 years later. He was quieter than Emma, more observant, with Michael's thoughtful nature and my stubborn streak. Watching Michael with our children was one of the greatest joys of my life. He was patient and playful, always ready with a story or a game of peekaboo. He built them a treehouse in our backyard that was basically an architectural masterpiece, complete with multiple levels and a slide. When James was 3 and Emma was 5, we started trying for a third child. It took longer than it had with the first 2, and there were moments when I wondered if it was meant to be. But Michael was always optimistic, always reassuring me that whatever happened, we would be okay. "We have 2 beautiful, healthy children," he would say when I got discouraged. "Anything else is just a bonus." Finally, after a year of trying, I found out I was pregnant again. We were both thrilled, but this pregnancy was different from the others. I was more tired, more nauseous, and the doctor warned us that there might be some complications because of my age. I was 34, which wasn't exactly ancient, but it was considered a higher-risk pregnancy. At 20 weeks, during a routine ultrasound, the technician grew quiet and asked us to wait while she got the doctor. My heart sank. I knew something was wrong. The doctor came in and explained that the baby had a condition called spina bifida, a neural tube defect that could cause varying degrees of physical and intellectual disabilities. He outlined our options, which included terminating the pregnancy or continuing with the knowledge that our child would likely need multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Michael and I held each other and cried in that sterile examination room. We had always assumed our children would be healthy, and the reality of potentially having a child with special needs was overwhelming and terrifying. "What do you want to do?" Michael asked me later that night as we lay in bed, both of us staring at the ceiling. "I don't know," I admitted. I'm scared. I'm scared of what this means for the baby, for us, for Emma and James. But I'm also scared of giving up on this little person who's already part of our family." We spent the next few days researching spina bifida, talking to doctors, and trying to process our emotions. We reached out to support groups and spoke with other parents who had children with the condition. What we learned was that, while there would certainly be challenges, many children with spina bifida lived full, happy lives. "I think we need to give this baby a chance," Michael said one morning over coffee. "I think we need to trust that we can handle whatever comes our way." I agreed, though I was still terrified. We decided to continue with the pregnancy, and I threw myself into learning everything I could about spina bifida and how to best prepare for a child with special needs. The rest of the pregnancy was closely monitored, with frequent ultrasounds and consultations with specialists. We learned that the baby was a boy, and we decided to name him Daniel, which means "God is my judge." It felt appropriate given the difficult decisions we had faced. At 37 weeks, I went into labor unexpectedly. Michael was at work when the contractions started, and by the time he got home, they were coming fast and strong. We called his mother to watch Emma and James, and Michael drove me to the hospital with the same urgency he had shown on the day we first met, though, thankfully, with much better results. Daniel was born after 12 hours of labor, weighing 6 pounds and 4 ounces. The moment he emerged, a team of specialists was waiting to evaluate him and begin treatment. I barely got to hold him before he was whisked away to the NICU for surgery. The next few hours were a blur of doctors and nurses, explanations about procedures and forms to sign. Michael never left my side, holding my hand and translating medical terminology when I was too exhausted to understand what the doctors were saying. "He's going to be okay," he kept saying, though I could see the worry in his eyes. "He's a fighter, just like his mom." Daniel's first surgery was successful, and over the next few weeks he had 2 more procedures to address the spina bifida. Each surgery was nerve-wracking, but Daniel proved to be incredibly resilient. The doctors were optimistic about his prognosis, explaining that while he would likely have some mobility issues, his cognitive development appeared to be normal. Bringing Daniel home was both joyful and terrifying. He required a lot of specialized care, and our house suddenly filled with medical equipment and therapy appointments. Emma and James were fascinated by their new brother, always wanting to help feed him or sing to him when he was fussy. "Why does Danny have to go to the doctor so much?" Emma asked one day, as we were getting ready for another appointment. "Because he needs extra help with some things," Michael explained patiently. "But he's still our Daniel, and we love him just as much as we love you and James." The first few months were exhausting. Between Daniel's medical needs, work, and taking care of Emma and James, Michael and I were running on very little sleep. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed and wondered if we were equipped to handle everything that came with having a child with special needs. But there were also moments of incredible joy. Daniel's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would calm down when Michael sang to him. Emma and James adored their little brother, and watching them interact with him reminded me that love doesn't depend on perfection. When Daniel was 6 months old, we were at the hospital for one of his regular checkups. The appointment went well, and the doctor was pleased with his progress. As we were leaving, Michael suddenly stopped in the hallway. "What is it?" I asked, concerned. "Do you realize what today is?" he said, looking at me with wonder in his eyes. I thought for a moment, then realized what he meant. "It's the anniversary," I said softly. 15 years ago today. You rear-ended my car. We stood there in the hospital corridor, Daniel sleeping peacefully in his carrier. And I thought about the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. 15 years ago, I had been a scared, ambitious young woman, rushing to a job interview. Now I was a mother of 3, married to the love of my life, standing in a hospital where our youngest child was receiving the care he needed to thrive. "Can you believe it?" Michael asked, shaking his head. 15 years ago, I was so worried about being late for a work call that I crashed into your car. And now look at us. I looked at him. This man who had been my partner through everything, who had held my hand through difficult pregnancies and sleepless nights, who had built tree houses and kissed scraped knees, and never once complained about the medical appointments and therapy sessions that had become a regular part of our lives. "You know what?" I said, stepping closer to him. "I think it's time we properly celebrated our anniversary. Right here in the hospital," he asked with a laugh. "Why not? This is where Daniel was born, where we've spent so many hours hoping and praying and celebrating his milestones. This place is part of our story now." Michael smiled and pulled me into his arms, right there in the middle of the busy hospital corridor. "I love you, Sarah Thompson," he said. "I love our crazy, chaotic, beautiful life. I love you too," I replied. And then he kissed me, the same way he had kissed me on top of the Willis Tower all those years ago, with the same passion and tenderness that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. As we kissed, I thought about all the moments that had led us to this one. The accident that brought us together, the first date that made us fall in love, the wedding that made us family, the births of our children that made us complete. I thought about the challenges we had faced and the ones we would undoubtedly face in the future, and I knew that whatever came our way, we would handle it together. People always talk about fate and destiny, about how everything happens for a reason. I used to be skeptical of that kind of thinking, but now I understand it differently. It's not that the universe has some grand plan for all of us, but rather that we have the power to create meaning from the unexpected moments in our lives. 15 years ago, Michael rear-ended my car at a red light. It was an accident, a moment of distraction that could have happened to anyone. But what we did with that moment, how we chose to respond to it, that's what made all the difference. He could have been defensive and angry. I could have been hostile and unforgiving. Instead, we chose to be kind to each other, to see the accident as an opportunity rather than a disaster. And that choice, that moment of grace, in the middle of chaos, led to everything that followed. As we finally pulled apart from our kiss, a nurse walking by smiled at us. "Congratulations," she said. "Is it your anniversary?" "Yes," Michael replied, grinning. 15 years of marriage, and it all started with a car accident. The nurse laughed. "Well, that's certainly a story to tell the grandchildren someday." Grandchildren? The thought made me smile. Someday, when we're old and gray, we'll tell our grandchildren about the day their grandfather crashed into their grandmother's car and changed both of their lives forever. We'll tell them about the power of taking responsibility for your mistakes, about the importance of being kind to strangers, about how love can grow from the most unexpected places. We'll tell them about their Uncle Daniel, who taught us that perfection isn't necessary for a life to be beautiful and meaningful. We'll tell them about the importance of family, of standing by each other through the good times and the challenges, of building something lasting together. But most of all, we'll tell them about the magic of ordinary moments, about how a random Tuesday afternoon in downtown Chicago can change everything if you're open to the possibilities that life presents. As we walked out of the hospital that day, Daniel still sleeping peacefully in his carrier, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the obvious blessings, our health and our family and our love for each other, but for the accident that started it all, for the moment of carelessness that became the foundation of our greatest happiness. Life is unpredictable and sometimes difficult, but it's also full of unexpected gifts. Sometimes those gifts come wrapped in packages we don't immediately recognize. Sometimes they come in the form of a fender bender at a red light, a moment of disruption that opens the door to everything you never knew you wanted. 15 years later, as I watch Michael reading bedtime stories to our 3 children, as I see the way Emma helps James with his homework and the way they both dote on Daniel, I know that we've been incredibly lucky, not because nothing bad has ever happened to us, but because we've learned to find joy and meaning in both the good times and the difficult ones. The accident that brought us together was just the beginning. The real story is everything that came after, all the choices we made to love each other, to support each other, to build a life together that's more beautiful than either of us could have imagined alone. And if I could go back to that Tuesday afternoon, 15 years ago, knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change a single thing. I'd still be running late for that job interview, still be stressed about my future, still be completely unprepared for the silver BMW that was about to change my life forever. Because sometimes the best things in life begin with a crash,